Imagine this. As the chill of October settles in and Halloween night draws near, the air is thick with the thrill of anticipation. Candy bowls overflow, and the promise of sugary delight sparkles in the eyes of every child. But what if the very essence of Halloween, the magic that fills the night, became corrupted and twisted by a force far darker than any ghost story ever told? What if the sweets that once brought joy now carried the weight of something far more sinister? Would you dare to confront Halloween's darkest myth, where the shadows hide a name best left unspoken? Hi, I'm Dev.
And I'm Cam.
And you're listening to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends trade stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up. So today I will be telling Cam about the murder of Timothy O'Brien, which took place on Halloween, October 31st, 1974. Have you heard of this case before, Cam?
I think I have, based on the year and the fact that this took place on Halloween. I believe I have. But if this is the case that I'm thinking about, I don't know too many details. So I'm still looking forward to you telling me more about this story.
Okay. I will say this story is pretty well known, but as we have approached spooky season, my favorite season, it just felt right to do some Halloween cases right now. But before we get into this pretty tragic Halloween case, what are you drinking, friend?
So tonight I am drinking a Cabernet Sauvignon from Milwaukee Brewers, something called the Club Series Reserve. Basically, this is allegedly a $25 wine that I got from $8 from an app called Too Good To Go. Quick plug, if you're into sustainability and reducing food waste, you should definitely check it out. What you drinking, friend?
Hashtag not sponsored. But I am drinking tonight just some ginger ale in my favorite Halloween wine glass. And I couldn't get him set up, but if you look in the background here, you can see the remnants of my Jack Skellington Squishmallow that I have set up for Halloween. I couldn't quite get him in frame like I wanted to, but it's okay. And before we get into today's case, I do just want to extend trigger warnings for the death of a minor child. So to get into today's case, Timothy O'Brien was born on April 5th, 1966, to his parents Robert Clark and Diane O'Brien in Pasadena, Texas. He was described as a very sweet little boy with a big, bright smile and was the older brother to his younger sibling. And his family was very active in the Second Baptist Church in Texas. His father, Ronald, was even a deacon and ran a local bus program as well. And like most children, Timothy was super excited about Halloween. And I, even as an adult, absolutely love Halloween. And on Halloween of 1974, Timothy was 8 years old. He went trick-or-treating with his father and his sibling around the Pasadena, Texas area. They were also joined by a neighbor and his 2 children. And on this particular night, it began to rain. So the group did not intend to stay out for very long trick-or-treating. In fact, they only planned to visit 2 streets during their outing. So as everybody knows, you go trick-or-treating, you stop from house to house, and on this particular night, Timothy, his father, his sibling, and the other family that was with them stopped at this one house that had all the lights off and was completely dark, which is usually a sign that the person either isn't home or doesn't want to engage with trick-or-treaters. But despite this, the group decide to knock on the door anyway. And of course, nobody at the home answers the door. And the children become pretty impatient, So they run off to go to the next house, and the neighbor follows them. However, Ronald, Timothy's father, decided to stay back just to see if maybe the person needs a little bit more time to come to the front door. And apparently, this would be the case, because after the rest of the family had run off, Ronald joins back with the group, and he has 5 21-inch jumbo pixie sticks. So, of course, the kids are super excited to see these giant pixie sticks, and Ronald just explains to the other parent that the person did come to the door and they gave them the pixie sticks. So Ronald distributes the pixie sticks to the children and allows them to continue on with trick-or-treating. But again, as it is raining that night, they end up having a very short trip and going back home. And on the way back home, Ronald would end up seeing one of the children that he recognized from his church and decides to give the 5th pixie stick to this child, who is described as a 10-year-old boy.
So let me get this straight. The person who had their lights completely turned off not only had candy for the children, but they had jumbo pixie sticks. Now, the couple of times I went trick-or-treating as a kid, I definitely knew where to go to for the large candy.
Come on now.
And it was usually the houses that were all decked out because they wanted to attract the kids who wanted the large candy. So it's really not adding up to me that this house that was completely dark also had these jumbo pixie sticks. And maybe it's just my inexperience. I've never really seen a jumbo pixie stick as like a popular Halloween candy to give out, because I feel like those are kind of expensive to be just given out to the neighborhood kids. But maybe that's just me.
Very astute observations, best friend. Very astute observations. Because I agree. Something is smelling a little fishy. But nobody questions this, and everybody goes home that night. So when they get home, of course, the children are getting settled in. They've gotten out of their costumes, and they're getting ready for bed. But you know the best part about getting ready to go to bed on Halloween is getting access to all of your Halloween candy. So Timothy asked if he could eat some of the candy he had collected that night. And of course, he chose to eat the jumbo pixie stick. And Timothy actually had a hard time getting into the pixie stick, so his father actually helped him open the pixie stick and then allowed him to eat the entire thing. But as Timothy is eating the pixie stick, he immediately begins complaining that it has a very bitter taste to it. And Ronald simply gave his son some Kool-Aid to help wash down the taste of the pixie stick. But very, very shortly after that, Timothy's condition begins to worsen. Timothy begins to complain that his stomach hurts, and he was in severe pain. So much so that he runs to the bathroom and begins violently throwing up and convulsing. Ronald then runs after Timothy to try to help him, and as he's comforting his son while he's vomiting in the bathroom, Timothy suddenly goes limp in Ronald's arms. So at this point, Ronald's like, we have to go to the hospital immediately. And he rushes to the local hospital. However, 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien would pass away while en route to the hospital less than an hour after he had consumed the pixie stick.
That is insane. How do you go from getting ready for bed, enjoying the candy that you got that night, to dying? And I can only imagine, what Timothy experienced, going from being so joyful and excited, because Halloween is such an exciting holiday for children, going from that to pain, just physical pain, and losing his young life. That is just so extremely sad that is how his night ended and how his life ended.
Absolutely. It was incredibly, incredibly sad. And the community was utterly devastated by Timothy's passing. And as they found out what happened, they began to panic. So as news of Timothy's death began to spread throughout the community, dozens of terrified parents rushed to police stations to turn over all of their children's candy that they had received during trick-or-treating from fear that it was laced with some kind of poison. And luckily, the police were able to very quickly obtain 3 out of the 4 remaining pixie sticks, and the children had not consumed the candy. However, the 5th child, who Ronald recognized from church, they had a harder time tracking him down. And when they finally did, the parents of that child were scrambling around the house trying to find this pixie stick, and they couldn't. So finally, they run upstairs, assuming the worst, as their child had went ahead and gone to bed. And as the parents opened the door to their child's bedroom, they found him asleep in his bed with his hand holding on to the pixie stick, which luckily he had not consumed. And reportedly, there was evidence that the boy did try to open the pixie stick, but was unable to remove the staples that were holding the wrapper shut. And this inability to open the pixie stick is likely what saved this little boy's life. So while the police are collecting this candy from the local community, Timothy's autopsy was performed. And when it was, Timothy's autopsy revealed that the pixie stick he had consumed was laced with a fatal dose of potassium cyanide. And when police were able to collect all of the pixie sticks, they're horrified by what they discover, as they find that the top 2 inches of every pixie stick was refilled with cyanide powder and resealed with a stapler. And according to the pathologist who tested the pixie stick, the candy consumed by Timothy contained enough cyanide to kill 2 adults, while the other 4 pixie sticks contained enough cyanide to kill 3 to 4 adults.
That is terrible. That is unthinkable that somebody would do that. Like, I think any murder is despicable, especially the murder of a child. But to do it in such a devilish way, to hide it in candy, I don't even think there's a word for how despicable that is.
How evil that is.
I'm just so glad that, one, that child couldn't get it open, and that the other children didn't consume any of it, and that their parents were able to get the candy from them before they could.
Absolutely. And I just feel so much for the parents who got that knock on their door from police being like, hey, these pixie sticks are dangerous. Your kid was given one, and then you can't find it. And you sent your child to bed, and you're running up the stairs, assuming the worst and praying for the best. I couldn't imagine what those parents were going through in those moments. So now that police knew that these pixie sticks are laced with cyanide and that this was absolutely an intentional act to attempt to kill innocent children, the police are ramping up their investigation immediately. So, of course, the police go and talk to Ronald, as it was reported that Ronald was the one who obtained the pixie sticks from this mysterious house. However, when Ronald spoke to the police, he initially told police that he couldn't remember which house he had gotten the pixie sticks from. But the police are like, that's really weird, because you and your neighbor only took your children down 2 streets for trick-or-treating because it was raining that night. So how do you not know which house it is? And on top of that, this house gave you jumbo pixie sticks, which is very specific. It's not like they asked you, where'd you get the mini Kit Kats from? Because every third house be giving that one out. Because I don't know if you guys remember trick-or-treating when you were growing up, but I vividly remember to this day which houses were giving out the full-size candy bars, which houses. We had a lady who used to bake cookies and punch. I remember where those houses are to this day. The people don't even live in them anymore.
Exactly. And on the other side, you also remember the houses that were giving out the licorice and the nasty candy. So you knew, oh, next year we're going to avoid it.
Exactly. Like the ones who was giving out apples and oranges.
Like, come on, we're children. We don't care about our health.
Come on now. So yeah, you remember where those houses were. I remember where those houses were. I know my parents remember where those houses were, but for some reason, Ronald don't remember where this house is. But the police don't pry too deeply into the inquiry. They instead just go to the streets that Ronald and the neighbors said that they did their route on. And they asked the homeowners what they gave out to children that night. And according to all of the neighbors who lived on the street, none of them gave out pixie sticks at all, let alone jumbo pixie sticks. So, because they're not getting any information, they think that there's a possibility that somebody has to be lying to the officers. So they decide to meet up with Ronald and walk the neighborhood that they went trick-or-treating on. And as they walked, they asked him to point out the house where he got the pixie sticks from. And it would take 3 different instances of Ronald walking around with police officers for him to lead them to the house where he claimed no one answered the door initially, but he ultimately received the pixie sticks from this house. And according to Ronald, the owner of the home never turned the lights on, but instead cracked open the door and stuck 5 pixie sticks out for him to grab. The only part of the man that Ronald saw was his arm, which he described as, quote, hairy, end quote.
What the fuck? Where do we even start?
Let's unpack, friend. Let's unpack.
Because first off, I don't care if I'm going door to door selling chocolate. If somebody open a door and only stick their arm out, I'm leaving. What type of haunted house, Halloween movie, Freddy Krueger type bullshit is this alleged person on?
I would love to know. I would love to know personally.
And then you take what this person gives you and you give it to 5 children?
Come on now. Come on now. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. If you're going to lie to me, at least lie well.
That part.
But unlike you and I, the police haven't put together that Ronald is lying yet. So they're like, great. We finally have the house. Now all we have to do is figure out who owns the house. And we'll know who committed this awful crime, right? So when they go and investigate who owns the home, they find that it's owned by a man named Courtney Melvin, who is an air traffic controller at William P. Hobby Airport. So of course, the police are like, hey, sir, we need you to come down to the station and talk to us because the word on the street is you out here poisoning children with cyanide. And during that interrogation, the police actually discovered that Courtney says that he wasn't even home Halloween night. Matter of fact, he didn't get home till after 11 p.m. on Halloween night. And the police were able to confirm this when over 200 people, including coworkers and friends, confirmed that he was at work all night.
I feel like air traffic controller got to be one of the jobs with the most witnesses.
Come on now.
And you were on the radio? Yeah.
This is easy. They ruled him out the day they went to pick him up. So now the police are like, okay, something's not adding up because Ronald is claiming he got these pixie sticks from this house. This owner is confirmed to have not been home. And Ronald has just been moving very, very weirdly this entire investigation. Ronald is doing too many suspicious things, and now the police are going to look into him. So when the police decide to take a deeper look into Ronald, they find that Ronald Clark O'Brien was over $100,000 in debt. Now, this is $100,000 in 1974, which, just so you know, for our lovely people back home, is almost $650,000 in 2024 money.
Oh my gosh. $650K. How do you get there?
Oh, girl, look, I can tell you exactly how we get there. But before I tell you how we get there, we got to tell you how we didn't get there. And we didn't get there by maintaining employment. because in addition to being in all of this debt, Ronald had a history of being unable to hold down a job for his dear life. As within 10 years leading up to this crime, Ronald had over 21 different jobs. Yes, ma'am. And even at the time of this incident, he was working at Texas State Optical as an optician and was actually about to be fired because he was under investigation for the suspicion of theft at his job.
What is going on here? So was he a trained optician?
I ain't even gonna lie to you, friend. I did not care enough about this man to look into his history, his past, any of it. So I don't know what this fool was and wasn't trained in.
Clearly not consistent employment, though.
That part.
And it makes sense that it's the 70s because nowadays it would be very clear to see that somebody could not keep a job. And I'm sure if they would have called up that previous employer and been like, yeah, so can we get some references? He wouldn't get any.
Come on now. So now that we've established that Ronald couldn't hold a job down for his life, now I'll tell you how he got in all this debt. Because the police discovered that his car was about to be repossessed. He had defaulted on several bank loans, and the family home was about to be foreclosed on. So I'm sure you can guess where this is going, because police quickly discovered that Ronald had taken out several life insurance policies on his children in the months leading up to Timothy's death. In January of 1974, he took out a $10,000 life insurance policy, which is worth almost $65,000 in 2024 money, on each of his children. And 1 month before Timothy's death, in September of 1974, Ronald took out an additional $20,000 policy, equivalent to $125,000 in 2024 money, on both of his children. And finally, just days before Timothy's death, Ronald attempted to take out an additional $20,000 policy on each of his children, but the insurance company wouldn't allow it for reasons I do not know.
Probably because why you need 3 life insurance policies on children who are young?
Come on now.
Because let's not forget, the reason that you have life insurance is to, one, cover things like funeral expenses, and for adults to cover any debts that they have remaining. A child doesn't have any debts. You don't need more than $30,000 to handle what you need to do for a child's funeral.
Exactly. Like, I knew for a fact my parents had insurance on me growing up, but I also knew for a fact it was like $4,000. It was like nothing.
Yeah.
Like, if I died, my parents didn't get nothing. If you're keeping up with the math and making sure the math is mathing, prior to Timothy's death, Ronald had attempted to take out $100,000 in life insurance policies on his children, which just so happens to be enough money to take care of all of his debt. But again, he was only successful in securing $60,000 of life insurance on both of his children combined. Now, if you're anything like me, I'm sure you're wondering, where's mom in all of this? Where's Ronald's wife? And by all accounts, Diane maintained that she did not know about the insurance policies on her children. And I will just note that by all accounts, there does not seem to be any high amount of life insurance on Diane, but that amount of life insurance on your children is suspicious and crazy. And for you to not know is concerning. But I think Cam is about to say the thing that I'm thinking, which is,
I feel like because this was the 70s, this was a time when it's like, oh, the man handles all the finances. The woman, us women, we just can't handle money and numbers. Our brains are too small and feeble. We're just too focused on our emotions. So, we can't handle the numbers and math and stuff. So I feel like because this was the 70s, men got away with just handling the finances, and their wives didn't really question anything about it. But I'm also curious if Diane knew how much they were in debt.
So, of course, Cam completely read my mind. I agree, and I do believe her when she says she didn't know because of the time that she's in. It's not normal, quote unquote, for a woman to have access to the finances because she's probably not even working. She has 2 small children. She's probably a stay-at-home mother. I don't know that for certain. I am 100% speculating. But that same thinking is what makes me believe that she also had no idea how much they were in debt. If I don't have access to the finances to even know that you're taking out life insurance policies on my children, there's no way that I know that your car is about to be repossessed. There's no way that I know that our house is about to be foreclosed on if I don't have any access to our finances. And plus, especially this is 1974, baby, if she doesn't have access to the physical workbook, she's not going to know anything. There's no digital footprint. There's no way she can just sign into the bank and see what's going on with the money. She doesn't have access. She doesn't have a way to check behind him and make sure he's doing the stuff that he says he's doing. And if he is her husband, I'm sure she thought she could trust him.
And I've heard of stories before where someone didn't know that they were getting foreclosed on, the car was getting repossessed until the tow truck came or the sheriff came up to the house and said, all right, y'all gotta go.
Right. It happens in 2024. I absolutely believe it could happen at this point 50 years ago. So to put a final rotten cherry on top of this cake in relation to the life insurance policies, the police would also discover that Ronald tried to collect on Timothy's life insurance policy the morning after Timothy died. Now, luckily, the insurance company did not pay out as Timothy had very much died under suspicious circumstances. So at least he didn't get that money, which again, this is what I always think is very stupid. You take out all of this money in life insurance, kill the person, so they die under suspicious circumstances. You're never going to see that money, ever. Hell, I remember my dad was very sick when we were growing up, and my mom had a crap ton of life insurance on my father. For context, we were a family of 6, okay? I have 3 other siblings. My dad at the time was also the primary breadwinner. So if something happened to my dad, we were screwed. My mom used to tell us straight up that if something happened to my dad and he died under suspicious circumstances, we were never going to see a dime of that money. We were all screwed if something happened to my dad under suspicious circumstances. So I don't understand why people think that, oh, I'm just going to kill them and they're going to die under these mysterious circumstances, have a police investigation, and for some reason the insurance company isn't going to reach in and look and analyze stuff, and they're just going to give you that money. They don't even want to give you money when you get in an accident and the police say it wasn't your fault.
Right.
They barely want to cover your medical bills.
And I'm sure the insurance was already looking at him crazy because, like you said, the other reason that people get life insurance for adults is to ensure that, you know, that person leaving is not going to leave them in a financially precarious place. Again, what money was Timothy bringing in?
Come on now.
For it to justify you trying to get $50,000 of life insurance on him.
I can't even believe they legally allowed you to put $30,000 on a child, especially a child that's not like a major athlete, a child that's not like a child Disney star or something that is actually bringing money into your family, even though I don't believe that they should be doing that. But, you know, that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. Why did they even allow you to do that? I'm glad they finally pumped the brakes, but they only pumped the brakes because you was doing a lot, big dog. So I'm sure all of this looks suspicious enough, right? Everything is looking like just a little too weird. But then police find the stale icing for the cake, which is that Ronald had visited a chemical supply store in Houston, Texas, inquiring about buying cyanide shortly before Halloween in 1974. However, he did not end up purchasing the cyanide at this particular supply store because the smallest available amount was 5 pounds.
He's a disgusting, stupid person.
Yes. Yes, he is.
It makes me sick to think about the planning that he put into this.
Yeah. It's disgusting. It's so depraved in a way that I don't think I can stomach for real. But luckily, now that the police have all of this evidence, they finally bring Ronald Clark O'Brien in for questioning. And when they do, Ronald maintains his innocence and says that he did no such thing, despite all the evidence that the police had against him. And shortly after this interrogation, Ronald Clark O'Brien would be arrested for the murder of Timothy O'Brien on November 5th, 1974, just 5 days after the murder. And he was charged with 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. And I'm sure you can guess that Ronald pleaded not guilty to all charges.
I would love to hear his defense.
Oh, girl, you're gonna love this, especially when we go through the prosecution's organized case. Because Ronald's trial began on May 5th, 1975. And during the trial, the prosecution is dropping bombshell after bombshell after bombshell. Bombshell number 1. A chemist who was acquainted with Ronald testified that in the summer of 1973, Ronald had contacted him about cyanide and asked him how much would be fatal. Bombshell number 2. A chemical supply salesman also testified that Ronald had asked him how to purchase cyanide. Bombshell number 3. Friends and coworkers testified that in the months before Timothy's death, Ronald showed a, quote, unusual interest, end quote, in cyanide and spoke about how much it would take to kill a person. Bombshell number 4. He also bragged about how he was about to come into a large sum of money, but never explained why he was going to come into a large sum of money. Bombshell number 5. Ronald's sister-in-law and brother-in-law also testified that on the day of Timothy's funeral, Ronald spoke of using the money from Timothy's life insurance policy to take a long vacation and quit his job. Which I'm like, bro.
This is why you're in the position you are in the first place.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
Don't you have $100,000 in debt?
Come on now. And honestly, this is just like the Chrisleys for me. Because again, how are you in this much debt and you don't give a...
Not a single one.
I don't understand it. Because again, I got a bill for $200 right there. It's not due for like 3 more weeks and it's stressing me out a little bit. I don't understand these people. And our final bombshell for the prosecution is Ronald's wife testifies against him. And she testified that Timothy did not choose to eat the pixie stick that night. He chose a different candy. And Ronald was the one who forced Timothy to choose the pixie stick.
Also, as a parent, it's night. You don't want your kids running around all night, but you choose to give him the jumbo tube of sugar?
Come on now. Come on now.
And coming back to reality, not the delusion that Ronald lives in, like I said, I don't even think there's a word for how evil this is. You forced your child to ingest poison, enough to kill people twice his size, 3 times his size.
Exactly.
Despicable.
Disgusting.
And do we know anything about what he had planned for his other child?
We don't know for certain, but as she was also given a pixie stick and also had $30,000 of life insurance policy on her, it is believed that this child was destined to suffer the same fate. But in a also shocking twist, the prosecution dropped the bomb that they actually believe that Diane was the original target and that Ronald had actually hoped to take out a large insurance policy on her, but seemingly Ronald could not afford to make the payments on the life insurance policy for his wife, which is so scary to think that the only thing that saved your life is the fact that he couldn't afford to plan to kill you. That's terrifying.
If he would have just put this same amount of effort into keeping a job, he wouldn't even be in this position.
Come on. Like, I'm sorry, and maybe I'm speaking from a privileged place, but that's okay. It's not that hard to maintain employment. I just refuse to believe it's that hard to maintain employment, especially when you're getting fired for things like theft. It's not like your manager doesn't like you. It's not like, HR is building the case for nothing. You're stealing.
Especially when it's the 70s and you're a white man.
Come on. So the only thing that police were never able to discover during their investigation is when or where Ronald managed to buy the cyanide. But they were able to recover a pair of scissors that had a waxy residue that matched the pixie sticks, as well as a stapler in Robert's possession. So while the prosecution is coming in with witness statements and evidence, those things that we like during trial, the defense instead maintains Ronald's innocence and chooses to appeal to the jury's sympathies by relying upon urban legends, specifically an urban legend that concerned a, quote, mad prisoner, end quote, who hands out Halloween candy laced with poison or needles, or candy apples with razor blades inside. And I'm sure everyone's heard of these urban legends before, despite the fact that before this incident, there are no documented instances of strangers poisoning Halloween candy until now. And it would be this defense that would garner national attention and lead to Ronald O'Brien being dubbed as the Candyman, or the man who killed Halloween.
Because he took what was such a light, fun holiday and instilled fear in parents and children for decades to come. Because look at how far the urban legends went without any real evidence of that happening.
Exactly. Because I remember my parents going through and checking our candy when we were growing up. I remember that being a legitimate thing. So after 1 month of trial, the case was handed off to the jury. And after 46 minutes of deliberation, Ronald Clark O'Brien was found guilty of capital murder and guilty of all 4 counts of attempted murder.
They literally went in there, put on a timer, and were like, all right, y'all, let's just do it for 45 minutes so it don't seem like we didn't give him a chance.
Oh, no, bro. I know exactly how this went. The foreman walked back there and said, so raise your hands for guilty. 12 hands went up and they said, I bet. But friend, you know what's even better than them only taking 46 minutes to convict him? The fact that during the sentencing phase, the jury only took 71 minutes to sentence Ronald to death by electrocution, because they had options and they picked electrocution. And Ronald would be set to be executed on August 8th, 1980. And just to close the loop on his wife, Diane would also file for divorce shortly after his conviction. And it has been reported that she has gone on to remarry and have more children. We wish her the best. So while awaiting his sentence on death row, according to a former chaplain who worked at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, Ronald was shunned and despised by his fellow death row inmates for killing his own child and was, quote, absolutely friendless, end quote. And reportedly, the inmates petitioned to hold an organized demonstration on Ronald's execution date to express how much they hated him. You got other people on death row telling you that you took it too far.
Literally. Because that's one thing about prison. If you did anything to a child or you committed sexual assault, yeah, they don't really mess with you in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the unspoken sentence that you get.
Absolutely. Because in prison, there is honor amongst thieves. I'm in here because I did whatever I did. But you, sir, committed a heinous act.
And then had the nerve to sit there and put on that shoddy ass defense.
Come on now.
The boogeyman did it? Please.
Yeah. So again, Ronald is having a very hard time in prison, which we stand. But his execution would end up being postponed several times. His first execution was set for August 8th, 1980, and that was postponed because his attorney successfully petitioned for a stay of execution. A second date was scheduled for March 25th, 1982, and that date would also later be postponed for reasons that I do not know. His third execution date was set for October 31st, 1982, which was the 8th anniversary of the crime. And two fun facts about this October 31st date. If Ronald had been executed on October 31st, 1982, he would have been the first inmate to be executed by lethal injection, as Texas was beginning to move away from electrocution and other forms of capital punishment. And the second one is that the judge who scheduled this date, Judge Michael McSpadden, offered to personally drive Ronald to the death chamber. But this date would also be postponed as the Supreme Court delayed his execution to give Ronald a final chance to pursue an appeal for a new trial. I don't know under what grounds he was seeking this appeal. And then a fourth and final date was scheduled for March 31st, 1984. And Ronald's lawyers sought to postpone the execution date again on the basis that lethal injection was, quote, cruel and unusual punishment, end quote. But on March 28th, 1984, a federal judge rejected this request. And on March 31st, 1984, shortly before midnight, Ronald Clark O'Brien was taken to the Huntsville unit for his execution. His last meal was a T-bone steak, French fries with ketchup, whole kernel corn, sweet peas, lettuce and tomato salad with egg and French dressing, sweet tea, saltine crackers, Boston cream pie, and dinner rolls. While awaiting execution, a crowd of 300 people gathered outside the prison and cheered, while some yelled trick or treat. When asked if he had any final words to say, Ronald's last words were, quote, "What is about to transpire in a few moments is wrong. However, we as human beings do make mistakes and errors. This execution is one of those wrongs, yet doesn't mean our whole system of justice is wrong. Therefore, I would forgive all who have taken part in any way in my death. Also, to anyone I have offended in any way during my 39 years, I pray and ask for forgiveness, just as I forgive anyone who offended me in any way. And I pray and ask God's forgiveness for all of us, respectively, as human beings. To my loved ones, I extend my undying love. To those close to me, know in your hearts I love you, one and all. God bless you all, and may God's best blessing be always yours. During my time here, I have been treated well by all TDC personnel." End quote.
Now, I am not somebody who supports the death penalty, but I think two things can be true here. This man deserved to die. He deserved death. But the government, in my opinion, should not have the final say in taking somebody's life. Am I glad he's dead? Yes. Was he living in some world of delusion where he, quote unquote, offended people? And that was his greatest crime? Yes, because for his final words to be complete denial of what he did, to be complete denial that he planned, orchestrated, and carried out the heinous, soulless murder of his 8-year-old son, along with the attempted murder of 4 other children, and he just didn't even reference that in his final words. He glossed over it like his largest crime was stealing bread from a grocery store. This man is literally on another plane. He had no remorse for what he did.
Absolutely. And this is a point that you and I have talked about before. We differ on the death penalty. I don't believe it's appropriate in every case, but there are some people that just need to be buried under the jail. And I'm a firm believer in that. And people like Ronald, who are so disillusioned and are so evil, in my humble opinion, should not be able to walk amongst us. There are people who are too evil for this world, and he is one of them. Again, not saying that the death penalty is appropriate in every scenario, but for those who are heinous and evil, who show no remorse over killing your own child. You don't have remorse for your own blood, for your own DNA, for the life that you brought into this world. That's a different level of heinous. It's a different level of evil that you could never convince me doesn't deserve to be buried under the jail. So to wrap things up here, on March 31st, 1984, shortly after midnight, Ronald Clark O'Brien was pronounced dead after his execution by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit, and would later be buried at Forest Park East Cemetery in Webster, Texas. And that is the end of the story of the original Candyman, Ronald O'Brien, the man who killed Halloween.
So as we wrap up today's discussion, we're going to move into our segment called Today in Crime, where we'll discuss a crime or a crime-related event that took place on this day. So on October 25th, 1994, Susan Smith reported a false carjacking to cover the murder that she'd committed. On this day, Susan Smith reported that she was carjacked in South Carolina by a Black man who took her 2 small children in the backseat of her car. Although authorities immediately began searching for 3-year-old Michael and 1-year-old Alex, they could find no trace of them or Smith's car. After 9 days of intense national media attention, Smith finally confessed that the carjacking tale was false and that she had driven her Mazda into the John D. Long Lake in order to drown her children. Both Susan and her husband, David Smith, who had had multiple affairs during their on and off relationship, had used their children as pawns in their tempestuous marriage. Apparently, Susan was involved with another man who did not want children, and she thought that killing her children was the only way to continue the relationship. Ironically, what she'd done came to light because she had covered her tracks too well. While believing that the car and children would be discovered in the lake shortly after the search was started, she never anticipated that the authorities might not be able to find the car. After living under the pressure of the media's scrutiny day after day, she buckled. She was eventually convicted on 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison. And that is what happened today in crime. If you found this story interesting, leave a newspaper emoji in the comments.
Yeah, girl, that case infuriated me. Again, it's like, why are we doing evil things to children? Children do not need to be caught up in your mess. I don't care how much you hate your ex-husband.
Exactly. And unfortunately, this is not the first time I've heard about someone killing their children because the man that they were dating didn't want children and they were like, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll just get rid of them.
You're absolutely correct. And that's the thing that always infuriates me, because it's like, no, the logical explanation couldn't be I just get rid of the man who has told me he doesn't want me, because surely he'll want me more now that I'm a murderer. Absolutely, he'll want me more. That I'm, in worst case, a murderer, or in best case, a terrible mother who abandons her children. Of course he'll want to be with me then.
And let's also add racist on top of that, because she was like, if I say it was a Black man that took my car, they're not going to look into it. They're just going to think it was this Black man that did it. Those big, scary Black men that have no morals and love to terrorize white women.
Obviously. That's the thing that's so funny to me about specifically racist white women have zero self-reflection. I'm convinced, because Sherry Papini had no indication that you, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman would go missing, accuse 2 Hispanic women of kidnapping you, and thought you weren't going to be investigated to the fullest, thought that was never going to come back to you. You thought you could pin a crime on a black man in South Carolina and they weren't going to go find him? They weren't going to do some deep investigation? And especially because if they did find the car, there would be a body missing. Because now somebody's wanted for murder.
Exactly. It's like, even in the case where they did find them, now there's a manhunt going on.
Right.
You couldn't handle all the media attention. Not only are you dumb, not only are you racist, not only are you soulless, you're also weak.
Absolutely. All the things. But again, like, anybody who's selfish enough to kill her own children to be with a man, it's not surprising to me that you have no soul, that you're weak, that you felt so much pressure and your feelings were the most important thing and you cracked. No care was given to your children who you allowed to drown in a car, but your feelings you cared about. Interesting. Any other thoughts, friend?
Nope. That's all I got.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode. I'd also like to thank Bailey Sarian and Danielle Kirsty for providing most of the material for this episode. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, please be sure to follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, be sure to tell a friend and leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish Podcast. And if you are listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel and feel free to leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends. Bye.
Bye.